I believe we're now all back in the main room. I'm going to try and share my screen here with the final webinar slides. So just bear with me for 1 second. All right, here. And what I'd love to do is to, now that we're all back here, to ask each of our very able and wonderful facilitators to tell us a little bit about their group discussions. So I was fortunate enough to have a nice small group discussion. I'm guessing that it was different and similar in different ways across the other facilitators, and would love to hear some of what you heard. Why don't we start with Sume, and then we'll move to Dianne and Claire and Lesley.
Great, thanks, Pemma. So we, in our group, we're looking at racism, anti-racism, racial equity. There were a couple of questions. I'm going to highlight, let's see, I'll highlight two. The first one was really, I think, at an organizational level, as more and more organizations are paying attention to racism and anti-racism, the question was, a lot of these organizations are not representative. They're not particularly diverse. They haven't actively brought in a racial equity lens. So so what we tend to see in organizations like this, which really, I think about is the majority of public health organizations, a lot of staff tend to be overburdened. So what can organizations do to respond to that, so that they become more inclusive spaces? And so to that, we really pointed participants to looking at some of our work which focuses on racial equity from an organizational perspective. So really calling on organizations to look at every aspect of how they function, from hiring to leadership to governance, the whole picture, so that they can become organizations which actually live out racial equity values. Also the importance of working in partnership with people in other sectors as well as community. The second I'm going to highlight is came from the perspective of someone who is racialized or BIPOC, and really thinking about how do you respond to issues of racism. So say the question was specifically around tokenism, but I think it can be extended to other issues. Is how do you respond when you see sort of racism in action? Like, how do you raise that within the organization? And for me, it's about being brave, trusting that you will, when you raise this, it will actually be heard correctly and it will be taken up, being courageous. And not because you are under any illusions that, that inequities don't exist, but that because coming from a place of hope really helps us move the work forward and being able to persist. And also the importance of finding a community of support both within the organization and outside the organization, so that you have that sounding board when you find yourself in challenging situations. Thanks, Pemma.
Thank you. It sounds like it was a really great conversation with some good perspectives shared. So thank you so much for hosting that and for holding that space to me. And if there are other questions about that, really any of the resources, you can continue to post them in the chat box. And also if there are any questions specifically for Sume, Sume has posted her email address there as well. So thanks for that. All right, can we hear some highlights from, did I say Dianne would go next? Dianne,
sure. I can do that. So we talked about the Health Equity Online course and just did a really brief overview of what was there and the history and how the course came together. Had some interesting questions. No one in my group or in the Breakout group had used the course before, so it was new for most of us. Had a question about, if the course really covered the responsibilities of health promotion or public health practitioners to take action on social determinants and system level factors. So there was a bit of discussion about that, and that it is an introductory level course. So the concepts are introductory, but there are pieces and then reflections on worldviews and in organizational capacity and in the module around actions for health equity that really can get at practical application to public health. There was a question and some discussion around the application to or use by community members. So as we do community engagement and work with community members to take action on equity. So there are pieces of the modules that would be applicable to community members as well as the organizations that they work with. And so really it depends on the community members that you work, and you would know them best, and whether it would apply. It is really geared to a public health practice perspective. So it just depends on the type and style of engagement that's happening. And then, question and discussion about styles of learning, and the modules really are set and developed with a variety of learning methods. They're built on adult learning principles, and there are a variety of audio and visual and interactive pieces. But certainly the knowledge quizzes at the end are one format. And so if we're really wanting to test and look at people's knowledge, that's part of the mobilization and the rollout, where we want to just take learners through in different ways to massage the concepts and how they apply to practice. So pretty interested group.
Thank you very much, Dianne. It's great to hear about that conversation as well. I'm conscious of the fact that we're at almost at the 2 o'clock mark. If anybody has to leave, we totally understand. If you'd like to continue to hear about the highlights from discussions, we'll try and go over those with you as briefly as possible, but do stay for a few minutes if you're able to. Let's move to Claire. Claire, are you able to share with us some highlights from your discussion on the Middle Managers Learning Pathway?
Well, I think for us, we were just, in the future, what I felt from the group is more time together. It was a nice small group and with lots of commonalities, and we had a number of students in our group, students of public health. I think just 2 highlights is that this was a resource targeted and meant for and developed for middle managers. So I think that was really appreciated and of interest. And the second thing was that it was hooked to competencies. And I think the group, those that spoke, felt that that would make it very helpful in their organization. And I think there's a desire within our small group that maybe we stay connected in terms of how we might use this and support middle managers on the way forward in their health equity work within their organizations.
Great, and great to hear that, and great that there's interest in staying connected. That's wonderful. Thank you, Claire. Lesley, do you have any highlights from your group discussion that you can share on the Health Promotion webinar series?
Yes, I'm happy to. First, I have to say a big thank you to Doris Gillis. She has been a professor at St. FX, and she's now out here in British Columbia, so we benefit from that, I would say. And she was the one in our group that had actually used the textbook that we were talking about, and the 8 different chapters that have been turned into webinars, some of them in French, mostly in English. And she really shared some valuable insights into how the webinars really brought the practice lens and the experience lens to the theory that is in the text, and how it actually drew people back to the text for more information and more nuggets. So it seemed to be a really valuable resource from that perspective. And some of the feedback that the group shared around the use of webinars like this, that it's very valuable in their own kind of self-directed professional development. So they were happy to hear a bit about these webinars. And I guess the final thing is just a little heads up to the NCCDH staff. I told everyone that they should identify which chapters they'd like to see another webinar or 2 or 3 or 4 on. So that actually goes for everyone. If you want to take a look at the chapters, there's 24 chapters in Health Promotion in Canada. We've done webinars on 8 of the chapters. So if you want to send an email to me via, Health Promotion Canada or directly to NCCDH, we'd love to know what you'd like the next webinar to be on. So I think I'll just stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lesley. That's so great to hear, and great plug for being able to voice what we'd like future webinars on for the Health Promotion series. I'll share just a brief set of comments from my small group. I also had a small group to talk about the Health Equity webinar series, which was part of a previous project that aimed to bring the Ontario Public Health Standards Health Equity Guideline to life with these webinars and how-to examples across an array of topics. And so the people in my group were talking about how there was 3 people from Ontario and 1 person from Manitoba and a few others that joined later. And the folks from Ontario were saying that it's often hard to actually put that guideline into practice and to feel like it's it's coming to life in your work. And so we looked at ways that the webinars could support that, particularly in this time of COVID, and working on strategies to integrate equity into the COVID response. And one of the suggestions that came up in the questions and answers was to look at the self-assessment questions and also the pre and the post assessments that come with each webinar, but also in the handouts, there's a series of discussion questions that you can approach either as an individual or with a group for self-reflection and for group discussion. And that through some of that dialogical piece, learning together around discussing those questions in the context of a specific situation, like responding to COVID, you might actually come up with some concrete actions as to how to bring that guideline into practice. But often that kind of learning and action will happen from that talking together and strategizing together in that kind of guided way, and maybe that the questions and handouts could help with that. So that's one of the things that came out. We also had a talk about race-based data and about assessing and reporting and some of the challenges around that. And I shared that we would have some work from the NCCDH coming out in a little while that Sume is leading around data and accountability and that kind of piece. So Sume, if you want to say anything else about that, you're welcome to. But other than that, those are the highlights for my group. So without further ado, as we are at the end of our time here, beyond the end of our time by 5 minutes here, I just want to say that we are always happy to take your further questions, to hear your feedback. Please complete the evaluation that you will receive. And absolutely contact us if you have further questions, ideas, or want to share an experience using one of these resources or any of our other resources. We're always happy to speak with you. Thanks so much. Be well, and we will see you another day in another Zoom or other session.